Well, hi Facebookers, this is Steve Barrett, Editorial Director of PRWeek. Welcome to our weekly podcast, and a little bit different this week. We've got a fantastic guest, Hernandez-Blades, who's SVP, Environmental, Social and Governance and Communications Officer at Aflac. I knew I'd stumble over that, but anyway, you get the point. Catherine, welcome to the podcast. But you've got a little friend with you. I've got my Aflac Duck. Never ceases to amuse us in the newsroom, does it, Frank? But you have got My Special Aflac Duck, and this is going to be a little lost on some of the podcast listeners, so we'll do a little visual demo to start this for our Facebook fans, and then we'll do the real podcast. Yeah, there he goes, or she, or yeah.
He's ready.
So tell us how this works. It's fantastic, isn't it?
Well, My Special Aflac Duck is a caring companion for children with cancer. And what it allows them to do is communicate better. Because can you imagine being a 3-year-old in the hospital and people coming in constantly asking you how you're feeling, and you don't even know how to verbalize that. But everyone speaks emojis, so we have these wonderful little emojis. I call this one the Steve Barrett emoji because it's the silly emoji.
Yes, that's about right.
So if I
everyone in the newsroom will agree with you on that one.
if I went into your room in the hospital and I said, Steve, how's your duck feeling today? It's a lot easier for you if you were a child to be able to touch the duck's chest with the emoji, and the duck could act it out. That's silly duck. You also have a little green one if you're feeling kind of unwell that day. You also have a medical port just like the one on the child, because the most traumatic thing about going through cancer treatment for a child is when they have their port access. So if I touch the
little
port
fella,
to you,
all right.
he's still
He's
unwell.
having a good time.
He's still unwell. But if I attach the port, he reacts, and then you'll hear the heartbeat, which is very soothing. He has touch sensors in his cheeks so he can nuzzle with me through my treatment. He also has tickle sensors under his wings, which we have a lot of fun with. There's an augmented reality world that you can go into through an app, and it allows the children to escape, because basically on average, the average pediatric cancer treatment is over 1,000 days.
Yeah, that's a long time. If you think of a 3-year-old kid, that's as long as their existing lifetime, isn't it? So, you know, the years are much more meaningful back then.
So you can blast off to outer space through your app. You can also feed and wash your duck through your app. You can administer medicine to your duck through your app. And he's just brilliant. We love him to death. Now, we spent 18 months in development with 100 families at the Aflac Cancer Center, and the parents only asked for one thing. Can you guess what that is? A mute button.
Oh, yeah.
So the mute button has been built into our little guy.
Yeah.
And we're very proud of him. We've delivered 4,000 ducks in 47 states to 190 hospitals since September.
Yeah, we gave the ducks away at our awards, I think, one year, was it?
The plush ducks.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
We never want to mute this in the newsroom, do we, Frank?
No,
we love it.
we would never.
Yeah.
Yours seems to have a theme. It's like is that a Christmas?
It is the holiday duck.
The holiday duck.
Okay.
Now, is there a grumpy emoji?
Well, if you're going to say it's Frank, I'm
Well,
going to be
I
very
was.
disappointed in you.
I'm fairly transparent with where I go on this podcast, and obviously we need a special Frank Washkuch grumpy emoji, you know, when there's no stories on the morning.
This is about as close as we get, and I've already put him on mute, so why don't we just leave it there for the
all right. Well, that's great. Thanks for demonstrating that. We'll maybe have a little bit of audio in the podcast, but I think that was good to go with the visual. So yeah, we're about to do the formal introduction and the podcast part of the show. That's the first, Frank, though, isn't it?
It is. It is. We haven't had an animatronic special guest.
We
yet,
have
so
not.
It's the first time for everything.
This could be a big whole new route for us to take the podcast to the next level.
A brand expansion.
Brand expansion, yes.
He's going to be speaking, or quacking rather, at Cannes as well.
Oh, great! Yeah. No, we'll look forward to that.
Just
too.
make sure he stays hydrated.
Yes.
Make sure.
We'll take good care of him.
Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the editorial director of PR Week, and I guide you gently through our latest podcast. Got a real special one for you this week because not only have we got Hernandez-Blades with us, who is SVP of Environmental, Social and Governance and Chief Communications Officer at Aflac. But Catherine, you brought along your special Aflac Duck as well, and we're very excited about that. A little too excited maybe for supposedly mature grown-ups, but welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, and yes, we did have a bit of fun prior to going live with our friend here.
We did on Facebook Live. If you want to check that out, we went through the emojis, etc. Can we have one quick word from our special Aflac Duck just to prove that, I don't know whether to say a he or a she, or it's
whatever you want it to be.
Absolutely, and that's the way it should be these days.
And say hello.
There he goes. All right, and he's going to be at Cannes,
Yes.
doing some presentations there with you next month. So before we get into that, Frank Washkuch's here, of course. Podcast will be
I'm being upstaged by a small dog, which is just okay.
Trust me, you get used to it.
So we'll hear from Frank a little bit later on some of the newsy stuff and that PR Week Global Awards. A lot of stories around this week, interesting acquisitions, people stories. The Bayer Monsanto fallout in Europe, that was an interesting story. And PR Council talking about interns and minimum wages. But Catherine, let's talk to you first. There's of course a really serious point to the Aflac Duck. It provides a lot of succour and care to children with serious diseases. Talk a little bit about that and how you kind of integrate it into your communications and marketing strategies.
Oh, absolutely. Well, if you think of the old days of marketing, we were taught about the 4 Ps: price, promotion, placement, all of that. Today with technology, if you're not developing something that creates an environment where people can have an experience that engages them so that they ultimately exchange with you rather than just purchase from you, you're working about 30 years behind the power curve. So for us, Aflac has had this beautiful 24-year partnership with the Aflac Cancer Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and over that time, we've donated $131 million to the research and treatment of pediatric cancer. So when we were going to innovate our $20 billion brand icon into life, we chose to do it in a way that was authentic and real to us. So we are spending...
How do you measure that $20 billion? That's a massive thing. That's the sort of value you place on. It's that important to the business, isn't it?
Yes, and our business has a $36 billion market cap.
Yeah.
So a big part of that's the brand. So taking this very expensive, exclusive, beloved brand icon that has become really a pop icon in both the U.S. and Japan, and changing it up a bit, changing the voice of it, it was a risky move. But to date, we have given out 4,000 to children in 189 hospitals in 47 states, free of charge.
And you were talking about yesterday you were in DC with a couple of kids. Just talk us through how the Duck was helpful with them and you know what you can do to help them with their illness and with coping with it.
This was the most remarkable story. It is so powerful. Think of these parents. They have twin boys who are 2 years old. One is diagnosed with leukemia. The other is cancer-free. They are not verbal because they're too young. So they truly don't understand why one is getting poked and having operations and the other isn't. And they never could talk about it together as a family, even though they tried. And the boys are now 4 years old. But they told us about before and after My Special Aflac Duck, and they actually use the duck to help them communicate with their children and help the twins communicate with each other. Why don't you want to play with me today? Well, maybe I'm feeling a little bit this way, and this would be the Frank.
A little bit grumpy Frank emoji, yeah. Yeah, and these illnesses last a long time, don't they? And if you're 2 and it lasts another 2 years, that's like 100% of your life where you've been suffering from the illness. And were they twins, did you say?
They are twins.
Right, so they're very closely aligned, aren't they? And it's an ordeal for both of them. So how does it, give us an example of how that really has made a difference and how it's helped families get through it as well?
Well, that is a very powerful example. The child life specialist at the hospital provided us with another one. There was a 7-year-old girl who,
Excuse me.
Bless
God
you,
bless
Frank.
you. God bless you.
Excuse me. I'll try to keep it to that. So.
No worries.
Is there a sneezy emoji?
Emoji, yeah. No. Not yet.
Well, there you go.
Well, this 7-year-old girl, whenever children come in for cancer treatment, it's very traumatic. And eventually they develop coping skills and it gets a little easier. The routine becomes routine. In the case of this young girl, nothing was working. Nothing was helping her. So they gave her a My Special Aflac Duck, and she calmed down quite a bit. She took her duck home with her, worked with it for a week, again, through medical play and the protocols that go with it. And when she came back a week later, which was the real test, she had her port accessed, did not cry, did not scream, did not utter a peep, just administered the same treatment to her duck.
Right.
And that's where it gets real.
Yeah, for sure. And something I didn't realize is 75% of your business is in Japan. Do you use the Special Aflac Ducks there, and is it the same theory, or do you have to alter that for different cultures and very different part of the world, although a very emoji-friendly part of the world?
True. So from an advertising, marketing, branding, and public relations perspective, we do have a duck in Japan for the commercials and the plush ducks and all of that. The voice is a bit different, a little more culturally appropriate for the Japanese. We were supposed to start delivering My Special Aflac Ducks in Japan in 2021. The response was so great to the ones in the U.S. We're actually pulling that forward, and we'll start distributing ducks there at the end of this year.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about purpose in business now, and our conference in October in Chicago is all based around that principle, the purpose principles, PR decoded. But obviously, businesses are in business. So how can purpose be used? Or firstly, how can you be genuinely authentic? And then secondly, how can it be demonstrated to your C-suite and your CEO that this is really producing returns for investors and from a business point of view as well?
Brilliant and important questions, and it's sort of the evolution of my role into the ESG space, which is much more material. And if you think about it this way, 2 of our 3 largest investors are BlackRock and Vanguard, followed by State Street, and they are all putting an emphasis on the materiality around ESG. But I can tell you this, in the case of My Special Aflac Duck, we have not spent one dime on advertising. Everything has been grassroots, traditional public relations. We did a survey last month. 15% of Americans have heard of My Special Aflac Duck, and of that 15%, 100% are more likely to buy an Aflac product as a result. That's an impressive number for your C-suite.
Yeah, so that measures the impact on the business. That's interesting what you said there about BlackRock, because of course Larry Fink, CEO, made that famous letter last year and followed it up this year saying, we're not going to invest in companies that don't have purpose at their core, which is a massive statement from the biggest hedge fund in the world. So do you have exposure to that, and how does BlackRock's sort of statement impact your business, but business generally, do you think, in terms of encouraging more people to be authentically purposeful?
Well, and that is a fascinating question, and we have been through this 3-year CSR journey, if you will. We had this great story about doing the right thing because it was the right thing to do, and then we had to translate it into something that people could relate to. And the reason for that is, if you want to recruit and retain talent these days, it's not like the old days where you could do the right thing because it was the right thing to do and you could feel good about that. people want to work for companies that are talking about the good they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a big shift. So now you've pulled that thread a little bit further, that it's not just CSR anymore, it really is ESG, and there are things you need to report out on. We were lucky, we had a great narrative, so all I had to do was find a way to tell it. So what we did, and this is also how I brief out the board quarterly on where we are in our reputation journey. Reputation Institute has a model, 7 dimensions of reputation, 23 attributes. Behind those dimensions, it's weighted by industry, and the attributes most closely associated with corporate social responsibility make up almost half of the model in our industry, which is huge. So we know we get the most lift if we can focus on those things. And so that's what we've done. So every quarter I go into the board, I show the graph, and what I do is I take our pulse score and I overlay our employee engagement score, our social media sentiment score, our editorial media sentiment score, our stock price, and our sales, accounting for the anomaly for open enrollment, because we are an insurance company and there's a spike there. So it can be somewhat artificial. And I can't isolate the metric enough to prove causation, but there's definitely correlation. When your reputation is up, everything else is up. And we've developed a proprietary formula internally based on our sales figures that actually give us return on reputation in a way that is statistically valid and authentic to who we are and how we want to report out to our board and our stakeholders.
So that's important because, you know, for generations, that's been the holy grail, is measuring the impact of PR or earned media and communications, and, you know, how do you measure the value of something that doesn't happen, or, you know, it's a crisis averted or whatever. So do you think we are getting there on the technology and data and analytics that can help you tell your story to your board and other communicators? Are we finally getting there?
I think we've still got a ways to go, but we're closer than we've ever been before. I think what we need to do, if I were to offer anyone some advice, is just look at the data that's relevant. I get 2,000 spam emails a week in my spam filter, unsolicited, from people who want to sell me some sort of data that means absolutely nothing to my narrative.
Yeah.
So as much as we can focus on it and tie it back to the business case, bottom line, we have to be business leaders first and functional leaders second. So you've got to understand the business side of your business and be able to tie all of those metrics back to whatever your business is focused on, whether that's growth, sustainability, whatever.
Do you think the job has changed? Because you mentioned that 2,000 different tech suppliers. You know, we've read the reports from Gartner about marketers are now spending more on tech than chief information officers, you know, to CTOs. So as a comms professional, you know, what are you seeing there in terms of what you've got to know, but also the people you're hiring and the people that you need to make sense of that world and then activate on it?
Well, data analysis is the wave of the future. I mean, if anyone were studying in college, I would suggest definitely at a minimum a minor in that, because you've got to be able to take that data and translate it into a narrative. It used to be, and I just wrote a blog about this, it was all about the golden Rolodex. It was who you knew, who you could get on the phone, who you could move to make things happen. You still need that, but now you also need the golden algorithm. If you get the Washington Post that has a bot that posts over 1,000 stories a year, you've got to make sure that when you push your content out, that there's enough in there that that algorithm will like your algorithm or your content so that you can be picked up. And I can't, by the way, call a bot and tell them, hey, you got this fact wrong, right?
Yeah, and finally, I mean, that doesn't always come naturally to communicators, does it? Because they tend to come from more of an arts, creative background. Same with journalists. So people are having to change their skills or just develop more of a numbers mindset, or are we actually bringing totally different people into the teams?
I think it's a mix.
Right.
I think and it depends, I think on the agency side, you can be a little more specialized. On the corporate side, you don't know who you're ever going to get thrown into a meeting with. So you have to be able to speak the language of the C-suite.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we'll dig into a lot of that stuff at the conference in October, and hopefully you're going to be part of that.
I'd be
on
delighted.
the speaker panel. But yeah, thank you for that. We've got our Aflac Ducks here. This is a special, yes.
You
Got
just
our ducks
can't
in a
help
row.
it. You just can't help it,
I
can
can't.
you?
I can't. I'm that annoying person in the newsroom. Actually, the funniest thing you said and the most relevant is that there is a mute button for the parents. So if the My Special Aflac Duck is getting a little bit too special and too annoying, the parents can mute it, which I guess is a blessing for them.
Yes.
For sure. All right, thank you, Catherine. We'll talk to you later as we get into all the new stuff. Frank, big week this week for the PRWeek Global Awards.
Yes.
They were held in London, the 6th version.
And you were
and better
there,
than ever.
weren't you?
I was there, yes. Been doing a lot of travel. That was my 5th visit to Europe this year. So, and then Cannes next month will be my 6th.
You haven't mentioned Ken yet.
Do you think I mentioned Cannes too much?
Maybe once or twice. Heard about it a little. Sure.
Point taken. Thank you, Frank. We'll need to get you out there to sample the croisette.
Sure.
Oh, we'll both see you there.
Yes. It's your first Cannes, is it?
It is.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, it's going to be terrific. Yeah, Global Awards. Over to you, Frank.
Yes,
I can
okay.
give some colour from the ground, but you can do the
Let
hard
me
facts.
highlight 2 of the big winners. Golan is the new Global Agency of the Year, unseating Weber Shandwick, which had won 4 straight years as Global Agency of the Year. The Editor's Choice Award for Campaign of the Year goes to Procter & Gamble's Always Fights to End Period Poverty by MSL for P&G in New York. And what that is essentially is it makes sure that girls have access to feminine hygiene products in their schools so they don't have to miss time at school or, take a half day or something like that. So
Yeah,
really
and
interesting
that's a
campaign, good
truly
campaign.
global piece of work because of the different cultural sensibilities in different parts of the world, and that P&G's work on Always has really sort of been groundbreaking over the years. We remember Always Like a Girl and campaigns like that. So yeah. So I suppose the agency of the year didn't go too far, did it? It went over the IPG
Across the
portals.
hallway.
Yes.
So to speak, yeah.
Gail Hyman was named Global Agency PR Pro of the Year. Very well deserved. Gail's a fantastic inspiration to a lot of PR professionals. And but it was great. So this event's really grown. There were about 400 people in the room this year, and candidly, I suppose the first couple of years it was mainly people from the US and the UK. But this year there were people from all over the world. There were people from Brazil, Russia, Europe, different parts of Europe, Asia, and Canada, all over the place, even Ireland. And it was a lot of fun to have those people in the room. PR Week's opened up in the Middle East, so there were some people there. We had from the Middle East. We had special categories for the best agency and campaigns in the different territories. So it's growing nicely. It's a great showcase for work. There were some interesting agencies that we birthed. Asda Bursa-Marsteller, Asda BCW, as it now is, from the Middle East, won the agency over there. Sherlock in Brazil is an interesting firm. They deal a lot with international clients. So yeah, it was a great night, really good pieces of work. You can catch all those online, prweek.com, both to see the winners and the case study write-ups, just as importantly behind those. But thank you to everyone who made the trip to London, and we're looking forward to growing that bigger and better next year. So yes. An interesting story in the States, Frank. PR Council, which is the sort of agency trade body, has made some statements about minimum wage and interns. Talk us through that one.
Yeah, so the PR Council has mandated that all of its member firms, as of January 1st of next year, should be paying their interns at least a minimum wage in their respective markets, which I think is a positive step forward. I think agencies should have been doing that already, but if they're not, they should get on board with it. So good for the PR Council on this.
Yeah, what do you think of that, Catherine? Because it's not so much. I don't know if it's as much of a thing on the client side to have a bunch of interns working on your team, but certainly in agencies, sometimes they've topped up their skills with a bunch of interns and they've not necessarily paid them properly. What's your view on that issue overall? But also, when you're picking agencies, how much do things like that, issues like that come into it? You know, we've heard about people insisting on diverse teams, etc., etc. To talk us through your take on that.
Well, the diversity, equality, and inclusion discussion is paramount. But so is treating your interns well. When I grow up, I want to be an intern at Aflac because we select about 30 a year to come to our corporate headquarters and work in the various functions, and they rotate around. We also put them up in an apartment. We take very good care of them. We have
Sounds
a lot
like
of
a reality
field trips.
TV show.
Well, you know, they're not in an apartment all together. They each get their own apartments.
That's probably a good thing.
That's a very, very good thing. But it's very competitive, and we treat our interns like regular people, which means they don't get a whole bunch of work dumped on them without the proper supervision. It is a phenomenal program. Look, when I was an intern in college, I was producing Good Morning Acadiana for free, getting out of bed at 3 o'clock every morning. You know, that's just what we did back then. I think it's brilliant, and it is such the right thing to do.
Do you think media, especially broadcasters, kind of taken advantage of that a little bit over the years, in that people want to go and work there? The glossy magazines, people would, you know, die to go and work there for nothing, and that almost meant that a self-selection process in its own right, because it was people who could afford to do it, you know, especially if they're coming to New York.
Yeah, it doesn't make it right.
No, absolutely.
But that circles all the way back to our DE&I conversation. If you do pay interns, then a reasonable living wage, then you do have access to a whole lot more talent. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so well done to the PR Council on that, and obviously we work with them on our diversity distinction in PR awards as well, which we've had a great partnership with them over the years and continuing this year, so do check that out because that's open for submissions. Next story is a little bit more complicated, I think, Frank. The Bayer Monsanto story and the fallout in Europe from a data issue that really revolves around records kept and profiles kept of journalists and other people impacting on the reputation of a company.
So long story short, here's the latest on it. Bayer has hired an international law firm, Sidley Austin, to investigate essentially how Monsanto, before Bayer had bought Monsanto, had created detailed lists of journalists and other public figures based on their statements about the company, the environment, and things of that nature. Now, of course, the laws on these sorts of lists change country to country, and they're different in Europe than they are here. So Bayer has hired Sidley Austin to essentially get to the bottom of how this happened and to notify people that were on the list to tell them what happened, essentially.
Yeah, especially different in France, where there are strict rules about the type of information that can be kept, especially if it strays into someone's political beliefs or their personal views on issues. So, interesting story. What did you make of this, Catherine? You don't have to talk specifically about that. It's more about the issue. We all gather information. That's kind of our jobs in the media as well, you know. And someone did point out this started when a couple of Le Monde journalists got hold of an email that came from Fleischmann-Hillard. This is what the assertion is. You know, talking about these profiles and data, and they started digging away at it. But you know, it's part of the job is to investigate people and talk about people, and you've got to be informed about them. So where does being informed stop, and where does an abuse of privacy start? You've obviously had a lot of experience of this in the insurance industry.
Well, it depends on the country, candidly. But the way, Frank, you just described this was when we were working as free interns. It was called creating a media list. Now, I think they've taken it a few steps farther, but this is why it's so important to be in lockstep with your legal team before something happens. Because had that guidance been provided, they wouldn't be where they are now.
Yeah, and what about the whole issue of privacy generally? When you've got a global market and you've got social media that is out there, you know, within seconds, yet you have different regulations in different parts of the world. What about that whole issue and the way it relates to communications and marketing?
Well, and it's also going to relate to corporate structure in the longer term, because you're going to see more holding companies that have subsidiaries instead of branches. branches in various countries. But yeah, you've got to have very in-tune cultural in-country counsel to support you from a marketing communications perspective, which you should have been doing already, but now you're going to have the public affairs piece and the legal piece as well.
So we've got to listen to the lawyers even more.
We've got to have healthy debate with the lawyers. How about that? And we've got to do it early and often.
Yeah. We should mention also that they've suspended the firms they work with whilst this investigation is carried out, isn't it? So yes. Whilst we should mention that nothing has been proven yet and there's been no final decision on whether something's legal or illegal, mm-hmm. the fact is they're taking it pretty seriously. If they've suspended working with them and they've appointed a third party to...
And they've also mentioned, Bayer has also mentioned on his website that it is no longer working with Fleischmann-Hillard on what they call PR, but working with them on marketing. So, interesting tidbit.
And is that just in France, or is that in other parts of the world?
They said it generally, so,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting stuff. And that's all really, part of this whole acquisition of Monsanto, which clearly is a controversial company. And since the acquisition took a long time to go through with all the regulation around the world. And actually, Bayer's share price has fallen by something like 40%, hasn't it? So it's caused a lot of issues there, serious issues for that business. And that, as with all these stories these days, it's about communications and reputation, isn't it? This is why what we do, what you do, and what the people in the industry do is so important. Yes. Okay, Frank, Huntsworth, another interesting company. They've made a couple of acquisitions in the health space, health communication space.
They've made two really interesting moves in healthcare this week. Bought 85% stake in Kine, which is a firm we've been following, a really kind of up and coming firm in the healthcare and medical communication space. It cost them more than $14 million. And they also bought CC, which is a Luxembourg-based medical communication shop. So Huntsworth really digging in the healthcare shop and adding that, or in the healthcare space, and adding two more shops there.
It's actually been on a bit of an acquisition trail, hasn't it, over the past couple of years, with Paul Tafe in charge there, and turning around some parts of the business that needed to be turned around. Grayling's had a tough time there, but then Huntsworth Health, the health part of it, is certainly booming. The health communications area is just becoming so, it's just growing so much, isn't it? What do you put that down to?
Well, we have a lot of the same regulatory constraints that the health community does. We are bound by HIPAA in the United States, which is the privacy legislation. But I will tell you, as we look at how politicized healthcare is now, into in the U.S. a 2020 election cycle, it's smart to get your public affairs in order. Brexit in the UK, how is that going to make healthcare look? I think
that's a great question. How's it going to change everything?
Right, and it's really smart of people to be looking at these things now rather than waiting until something happens to you. Hopefully you can be the thought leader on the front end, sort of what we're trying to do with ESG. Mm-hmm. We know the states want to regulate it, they don't know how yet. So we are creating a best-in-class program that will hopefully be the thought leader for others to follow, and it's really smart to do this.
Yeah, and that's on the sort of sell side, if you like, and on the buy side, as it were. Patients now are having much more of a proactive say in their care and being more informed, even if it is just looking stuff up on Google, which must drive healthcare providers crazy, but that's the sort of relationship they want, don't they? They want access through their mobile device. They want very flexible access to their healthcare practitioner, etc., etc.
I had a doctor tell me one time what she thought was wrong, and she said, whatever you do not Google it.
Yeah, we cover a lot of this stuff on Medical Marketing and Media, our sister title, which Frank works on, and I work on a little bit as well. And it's fascinating stuff, for certain. And yeah, I mean, if you look at, I've just been in London for those global awards, you're not allowed to advertise pharmaceutical companies over there, whereas here they're ubiquitous. Over there, betting companies are ubiquitous on TV, but they're not allowed to advertise in the US. Well, that's coming in a little bit, easing up a little bit.
Yep.
So yeah, to your point, it's every region's different, especially in a highly regulated industry. All right, finally, Frank, Weber has hired a new person to replace Luca Panatti
Will Ludlam.
on the West Coast.
Will Ludlam is their new U.S. West president. That means he's going to oversee offices for Weber Shandwick in Los Angeles, the Bay Area, and Seattle. He's going to report up to Sarah Gavin, who is the Weber Shandwick president of North America. And like you mentioned, he replaces Luca Panatti, who departed Weber Shandwick in March and recently opened his own consultancy.
And fascinatingly, Will was most recently at Edelman.
Yes.
So that's always fun, isn't it, when someone moves from, and especially remember Richard Edelman when he went up and got his award in March, and he got his 20-year, most 20-year agency PR Pro award, and well deserved, but he did have a little quip at the Weber table, so maybe that's their way of getting their own back a little bit. So yeah, although they would never say that out in the open, but I can, because I don't work for either of them.
But you're the groom, because we cannot let this webcast end without congratulating the groom and wishing the bride best wishes.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Yes, glad you clarified that you were using the word in that form. So yeah, still getting used to wearing the wedding ring on my finger, but yeah, it's been fantastic. In fact, that London trip was my first time away from my wife, so clearly I ran back as soon as I could. Made it as short a trip as possible, but thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Let's have one more tweak of the old Aflac Duck, shall we? There he goes, can't get enough of that. Few customer service announcements. We've got our Hall of Fame event in New York City on June 5th. Catherine is an alum of the Hall of Fame, was honoured to become a member of that. Was that 2 years ago?
Very much so, yes.
Yes, that's right.
So one of the highlights of my career.
It's such a great event. There's such a great feeling in the room, and hopefully this year we've got some interesting stuff. We've got Gail Becker, who used to be at Edelman and is now went off to run her own company called Cauliflower, making pizzas out of cauliflower. And it's grown to a 50-60 million plus firm in a company in about 2 years. So Gail's going to be there, and we have it's Cauliflower and Country, because we've got Jennifer Nettles, who's an award-winning country singer, and she's going to be joining us as well, amongst a bunch of other very excited about the event, and you can find out more about that on the website. So that's on June 5th. And as I mentioned earlier, the PRWeek conference is PR Decoded Purpose Principles. That's in Chicago on October 17th. We're going to have a fantastic lineup of speakers, hopefully including you, Catherine.
I'd be delighted.
Yeah, no, we'd love to have you there, and because it is so relevant at the moment, and it's absolutely crucial. So yeah, it's the biggest issue of the day. But that's all we got time for. We'll see you next time on the PR Week.